Le Roi et l'Oiseau, or The King and the Mockingbird in English, or also known as The Curious Adventures of Mr. Wonderbird. For animation fans, this is one of those movies that they've probably heard the name mentioned a few times, but most likely haven't seen. However, when one decides to fully look into what it is, they will discover a fascinating piece of animation history, and we didn't even look into the movie itself yet. Originally began production in 1948, director Paul Grimaud wanted to create an animated adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep, with the help of French poet Jacques Prévert. But then afterwards, the feature would go through an insane journey that would last for decades, losing control of the project, a backstab from the producer by releasing it unfinished in 1952 without any of their permission, a quest to regain the rights 15 years later, and then accumulating enough money to finish his vision of the film to finally release it in 1980, which is the version I'll be reviewing here. So with the time it took, it's right up there with The Thief and the Cobbler as one of the animated films with the longest production history. So now that we're going into France's most interesting piece of animation, will the years of effort and struggle of bringing this to life be more than worth it? Or did the film end up being as likable as The King? Let's find out! The story. This might be one of those movies that would set its focus a little more onto the artistry more so than the actual storytelling. But luckily, it doesn't abandon one for the other and still crafts the story to be pretty solid. The only major criticism with its writing would be regarding its simplicity. The story is set in the kingdom of Tachycardia, where two painting figures of a shepherdess and a chimney sweep are in love with one another. But in order for them to stay with each other, they must escape the ruthless king and his servants with the help of some friends they meet along the way. And that's pretty much the whole movie in a nutshell. No interesting development or complexity on the romance, the characters keep themselves basic, and have a whole checklist of love story cliches, resulting the plot to be one of the most straightforward and predictable love triangle stories ever told.
D'ailleurs, c'est écrit dans les livres. Les rois épousent toujours les bergères. Ce n'est pas possible, vous refusez? Et pourquoi?
Oh, voilà une question. Pourquoi voulez-vous qu'elle vous épouse, puisqu'elle aime le ramoneur?
On paper, it would be very tough to sell this to anyone. But in the hands of Grimaud and Prévert, they add their own magic to show their audience a little more than what it wants to tell. One obvious highlight that the film wants to present outside of young love is the kingdom of Tachycardia, where it does spend some time on world building to show how the king rules his land and the many functions of what the castle can do, giving more credibility to the world that's around the characters. But more importantly than any of that which the movie uses to make the most out of its plot is the tone. Since it is based on a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, it fully embraces the fantasy elements to breathe new life onto the world and to make it easily acceptable to expect the unexpected. I mean, when the heroes are two living paintings and a talking bird, why not suddenly throw in flying henchmen and a giant robot? Sure, it's not a great story by movie standards, but it did fully succeed in telling what it truly is: a fairy tale. The animation. Out of all the elements that are in this movie, I wouldn't be surprised if the main one that Grimaud wanted to show the world after all these years is the animation. And I can see why now, because it is beautiful. The craftsmanship here can almost be completely comparable to the works of Disney, which can probably help sell the fantasy component. The only thing that would be different from Disney is the character designs. They evoke a more playful and cartoon-like tone for the purpose of stepping back from any sort of realism. Some could say that the designs are more storybook-like, if you will. But while they can be impressive on their own, the character animation would suddenly make them look amazing. I mean, Look how smooth these movements are! The film would take so much advantage of the skills of the animators that their body language says more about them more than the dialogue. Not to mention the way that they crafted the backgrounds and how the movie looks into every angle both in and out of the castle to display everything that it can do. However, as it is an animated film that literally took decades to make, it does happen when it visually loses some consistency. While most of the animation presented in the film was crafted at the start of production from the late 1940s to the early 1950s, there is a bit of a noticeable difference between the early animation and the ones that were later made in the late 1970s, where the latter brings out a more limited look in the movements and the designs. Now, I'm not saying that the 70s animation here is bad in general. Sure, it looks like a downgrade compared to the works from the 40s, but the effort is shown that it does try to blend with the older pieces, and it's not far off from what was done then. In a way, they act like patches on a shirt. They're not noticeable and might devalue the product, but at least they're doing their job and make it look complete. While not necessarily perfect, the animation shows that the movie is art in motion, both figuratively and literally. The characters. As I've mentioned before, a big part of what makes the movie feel simplistic is that it has simple characters. Some may have a bit of depth in them to show more of their personality, but they don't go outside of the archetype role that they're supposed to play. The most one-dimensional characters presented here are the protagonist, the shepherdess, and the chimney sweep, both just acting like the young lovers who are head over heels for one another. But then a little more spice would be added when the bad guy comes into the scene, and that is King Charles the 5 and 3 make 8 and 8 make 16th. But for everyone's sake, let's just call him the king. He is a tyrannical egomaniac that surrounds himself with yes men that would stop at nothing to get whatever he wants, including to have the shepherdess to be his bride. As the bird himself would describe him,
Ce n'était pas un bon roi. Il détestait tout le monde, et tout le monde dans le pays le détestait aussi. La solitude et la chasse étaient ses passe-temps favoris.
in a way, he can be viewed as just your typical evil king, but unlike the heroes, at least he does show a bit of personality so that he can be somewhat memorable. The same can also be said about the bird. As he plays more as the lover's helper, there is quite some depth in him that explains well who he is. As a father of 4 chicks, he vows to always torment the king by taunting and trolling him as revenge for killing his wife while hunting. As for the other characters, there isn't a lot to say about them. They're either meant to help out the lovers or to help the king capture them. The only standout supporters in this case would be the king's puppy and the bird's chicks to supply the Q factor, and the blind barrel organ player who acts more like a poet that just wants to celebrate what makes the world better than in the kingdom.
L'oiseau! Ils ont vu aussi un oiseau. Je vous l'avais dit, les amis, nous sommes sauvés. Le monde existe, le soleil brille, et il y a aussi des oiseaux. Ah, la vie est belle, nous verrons tout cela un jour. En avant la musique!
After watching the film, it's kinda understandable why it's called The King and the Mockingbird, because they're honestly the only memorable characters in this film. They're not bad characters, at worst they're just forgettable, but they don't necessarily offer a lot to remember either. Le Roi et l'Oiseau has some very good reasons why it's often used as the prime example of French animation. While its simplicity may hold it back from being a true masterpiece with a weak plot and a bunch of forgettably plain characters, it does stay strong with the story that presents a powerful fairy tale feeling and some amazing top quality animation. For any animation enthusiasts and cartoon buffs alike, this is definitely one to check out to explore some classic international animation. Also, if you're more in the mood for a simple fairy tale movie outside of Disney, then this would be a good find. This may not get the perfect happily ever after it was looking for, but at least it is something that would end up leaving people satisfied. Hey guys, this is AniMat's, and wow, what a fascinating piece of animation. It really is, and for someone like me, I feel like I'm actually really happy that now I have seen something like Le Roi et l'Oiseau, or The King and the Mockingbird, and it truly is something that, even though I don't find it to be a perfect animated film, I still highly recommend it to any animation enthusiast out there. Rather it be if you're someone who's in the animation industry, you aspire to be in the animation industry, or if you're someone that really likes animation in general, then it really is a film that is worth checking out. But probably the most notable thing about The King and the Mockingbird, and it's probably the reason why there are some people who might have heard about this movie, is that this is actually the film that would go on to inspire a lot of people that would go on to become big animation legends. Probably the most notable one that I can mention is Isao Takahata, the director of such films as Grave of the Fireflies and The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, and also the co-founder of Studio Ghibli. But what is interesting to note is that in my research, I have also found that there is a possibility that even Hayao Miyazaki himself was actually inspired by The King and the Mockingbird to go and pursue into animation, or that he really was inspired by The King and the Mockingbird to do what he does right now and to go and create his own magical legacy of animated films right there. So this is the definitive animated movie that would go on to inspire the Studio Ghibli creators. And hopefully, the reason why I highly recommend for animation fans to go and check it out is that maybe this movie can go and inspire them as much, to go, well, you know what I mean, to go inspire them, probably just like how this movie inspired Takahata and possibly Miyazaki as well. So I feel like that's probably a very important factor to go and note about this. And also, the little connection that The King and the Mockingbird and Studio Ghibli, like kind of that little connection that they would have in common. Alright, so with all that said and done, I think we are pretty much over with The King and the Mockingbird. And now it is time that we shall go and move on to a Patreon request. And this time right now, we are going to be taking a request from Jazzy. So I would like to start off by saying that if you guys would like to be like Jazzy and you want to go and support my work and get some amazing rewards at the same time, including seeing my videos before anyone else, then all you have to do is just go to patreon.com/animat. But at the same time, if you guys would like to request me an animated film that you would like me to review and I would put onto the animation hat, then all you have to do is just write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. So with all that said and done, let's go and raise the ultimate question. What is it that Jazzy requested me to do? What animated film are we going to go and watch this time? Well, very interestingly enough, we're going to be doing some major traveling. Now that we have seen an animated film from France, we're going to be jumping all the way to Japan. So we are going to be watching a Japanese animated feature. But not only are we going to be traveling from one place to another, but we are also going to be traveling way back in time. And I really mean way back in time. Not necessarily one of the earlier Japanese animated films, but I mean more like during the age of the dinosaurs.